A close family member of mine is an avid churchgoer, and one thing that I noticed of her particular place of worship is that they adamantly ask for tithings, or monetary offerings to the church, and plenty of them. I agree to some degree that places of worship should be supported by their patrons in order to thrive, but from what I've experienced there, it was to an excessive extent. My close relative at the time was struggling severely financially. All they had of their paychecks they'd invest in the church. I'd see the pastors and their family adorned in the finest jewelry and apparel, driving the newest car models, and just all around living a life anyone would covet. And my family member in their modest clothing, beat down vehicle, and check to check lifestyle was aiding to lavish theirs. This is not to say that this family did not deserve every bit of their success. Quite the contrary. Some of these people have worked humble beginnings up to massive stadium-like arenas where masses gather for a spiritual sanctuary. The purpose of this story is to provide experiential insight on the situational inequity it sheds light on. I believe that churches should be taxed. The incoming revenue of some of these institutions, especially megachurches, is staggering. A charismatic character with the ability to charm masses can earn themselves mansions and luxuries beyond some of our wildest dreams. Their tax exemption, considering the lucrative nature of what in essence is a business, is unjustifiable to me. For one, taxation, regardless of the institution, is a fiscally sound requisite across the board. The revenue collected from taxes is one of the main pillars of our societal infrastructure, meaning taxing churches would significantly boost the state of the economy and strengthen said structure. Not only that, but exempting churches from taxes is blatantly partisan. It only makes sense that if offerings filtered into the church are tax deductible, that same revenue the church is receiving be taxed equitably. Not only are churches exempt from paying federal income taxes, but they are not even required to pay property taxes, and this is true of churches in all 50 states. The costs of land, facilities, and utilities alone could ameliorate the economic crisis we're inundated in. Unlike other tax-exempt organizations, churches do not even need to undergo the tax exemption application process. The church is free to function as a tax-exempt operation without any outward authorization from the Internal Revenue Service, in turn, raising questions of legitimacy, which we will touch back on. According to Forbes magazine, there are approximately $500 billion in church property that go untaxed in the United States. Statistics show that in New York alone, there is a loss of nearly $627 million from exempting religious institutions of property taxes, and that loss was reflected since 2011. The Church of Scientology, on its own, brings an annual income of a whopping $500 million. Exempting the church from taxes is also in direct violation of the separation of church and state. Since the exemption is associated with denominations, the line where state ends and church begins becomes extremely nebulous. Therefore, before, when church and state worked in conjunction, the church was exempt from taxation. Secular organizations such as soup kitchens or homeless shelters are rightfully exempt because they are charitable nonprofit organizations. When the government proceeded to separate church and state to prevent an abuse of power as a result of a presumed collective alliance, the tax exemption for churches was still allowed to persist. Since these laws have been amended, there is no reason for the exemption to endure since it's clearly antiquated. Non-secular institutions such as churches cannot be considered nonprofit for the sole reason that they offer a service that they are in turn compensated for, many churches handsomely at that. An example to put this into perspective is consulting a lifestyle or health coach. They provide a service, one that supplies people with insightful ways on improving their lifestyle, but coaches are fittingly compensated for their time and expert guidance. Exempting the church from paying taxes makes the system imbalanced, flawed, and dated. One very substantial ramification that impacts us as a whole is that the tax exemption of churches consequentially burdens us as taxpayers. The government provides for these religious institutions, but these institutions do not help sustain these provisions from an economic standpoint. The government collects from its other citizens to compensate for the church's tax exemption regardless of any benefit it reaps us or any personally held convictions. In essence, exempting religious institutions from taxation makes everyone else carrying the burden of the exemption, regardless of creed, an advocate for these institutions they are mandatorily financing. When it comes down to it, this makes us unequal in the eyes of the law. The system is imbalanced, and the church is clearly favored over any of the other institutions excluded of this same consideration, and that in itself makes it unlawful. No one should ever have to lend support obligatorily, let alone fund a cause they do not personally lend credence to. At that point, it directly impedes on freedom of religion. So to conclude, I believe that support is necessary to the prospering of any institution, especially one with a following. However, I also believe that the means of its growth should by no means exceed or be exempt of the lawful obligations of every other individual that abides. What is to stop one from fabricating a religion and congregating just for the sake of fraudulently evading taxes? Let's take the place of worship for Scientologists, for example. Scientologists actually fought the IRS for tax exemption and ended up winning their case, despite controversy due to their outlandish convictions that they hold to be true, which farcically include, but are not limited to, extraterrestrial beings. What is it that constitutes legitimacy in a congregation? Cult leader Marshall Applewhite organized the religious group Heaven's Gate and orchestrated the mass suicide of his followers. Surely no one in their right mind would agree to government funding for that, but freedom of religion makes it so that it's much more difficult to differentiate or deem a religion real, let alone worthy of tax exemption. This is exactly why these long-held, anachronistic laws need to be reviewed and modified.